Okay, awesome. Just a quick test. Can I be heard by everyone?
Yep.
Yes.
Okay, awesome. Let me just share my screen really quickly. Okay. Can this be seen? The slideshow.
Yep.
Okay, awesome. All right. So, hi, my name is Bertiz, and for my capstone, I explored game audio and dialogue, specifically exploring audio-driven gameplay systems and voiceover systems for games. And what this entails is basically just having music in games sort of automatically change according to what's happening on the screen and automatically sort of like arrange and compose itself, as well as having voiceover play over text and stuff like that for narrative or just whatever other purposes. And I did all this in the context of a game that I made myself called Dungeon Delvers. It's a simple roguelike action game that I built in Unity using C#, and I implemented the audio using Wise, which is a software that the games industry uses a lot for this purpose. It's a very simple game where the goal is just to complete as many levels as you can. You fight monsters in like these levels, and you collect gold, which you can then use to buy upgrades to once again complete more levels. So the game just sort of works on that sort of loop. And with the game sort of briefly explained, I also just want to go over the sort of topics that I'll be going over. I'll be going over how I implemented the dialogue and the voiceover, how I organized the assets, and how I played back the voiceover at the correct times with the correct text and subtitles and whatnot. And I'll also be going over how the gameplay systems for the game worked and how the music sort of arranges and composes itself as you're playing the game. So first off, for the voiceover, what I wanted to accomplish and the goals that I wanted to have is just to have the audio play alongside the text and for the dialogue to sort of advance narratively, sort of like a stage play. And some of the things that obstacles that I encountered while doing these things were having to start and stop the dialogue at specific times. You know, this isn't like a movie or like a play or whatever where the dialogue will always happen at specific points. You know, the player has to trigger these things, and the player can do them at like random times that you can't really predict initially. And another issue I had was subtitling dialogue, making sure that everything was playing correctly so that even if you have like your volume low, or even if the player can't like hear the dialogue, they can still read and understand what's going on. And to sort of go over what I did for it, I just sort of made like a custom data type that holds two things, just text being spoken and the audio that plays alongside this text. And with this, we can either select a single dialogue line trigger, like a one shot, like a short quip or whatever, stuff like that, or we can go down the list to advance the dialogue sort of chronologically. I have an example of it right here. Just as a short side note, I unfortunately lost some progress due to some like technical / like GitHub issues. So I had to use like my test dialogue as an example, but it should get the point across either way. This is in the context of like the shop. So when you buy certain things, the shopkeeper have certain quips that they'll say. And the shopkeeper is also me. I recorded the dialogue.
Welcome. Thanks for coming by. Guaranteed to help you last longer. Hope you like the flute. I made this one myself. Hello, this is a test. God, I hope this works. Anyway, thanks for sticking around. See you later.
Yep. So that again, it's a test dialogue, but it should still show how everything chronologically plays and how the one shots can just sort of play quip and whatnot, depending on when the player presses a button or does an action. And that was really the voiceover part. The other part that I wanted to study was the dynamically composing music. So triggering music according to what was happening on the screen and according to actions that the player does. And what this entails was basically just adding and subtracting musical ideas in order to sort of aid in the gameplay process. In this context, I wanted to increase the intensity of music as the gameplay itself intensifies. And in order to do this, I had to overcome a couple of obstacles, mainly finding out where which states or events in order to properly like trigger these sort of changes in the music, and as well as composing and making the music itself and making sure that it can work with this specific structure. So while I was composing in this sort of context, I kept in mind two main things, mainly musical layers, having different instruments fade in and out. I thought of it sort of like a rock band, where sometimes the guitarist will start playing chords, and then after that, the bass line will start playing a bass line, and then drummer, vocalist, so on and so forth. But the challenge of doing that in this sort of context is that whereas in a song, it's sort of static. You always know after 2 seconds, bass line comes in. After 2 more seconds, drummer comes in and whatnot. In a game, this can happen randomly. So the music will layer over itself at random times, depending on what's happening. So we have to craft transitions that will bridge the gap between these sort of ideas smoothly and coherently, even if the sort of triggers are randomized themselves. And you can sort of see an example of this in the music that plays in the shop. Some of you might have noticed a music upgrade button, and when you click this button and buy the upgrade the music layers over itself. And again, this isn't like happening statically. This is all happening automatically through the game and the systems that are running behind the scenes. So there you can see how the music layers into each other without a sort of like set time frame of when it happens. It's just when you click the button, it transitions into the next layer and then the next layer, so on and so forth, in rhythm and in tempo. And for this example in the hub shop, you're looking at just like a menu. Things aren't really changing too much, but when you're like fighting in a dungeon or fighting monsters, more things are happening on the screen, and you want to keep track of those things that are happening in order to reflect what's going on. So in order to do that, we need to keep track of certain values. There are different ways to do it, but the way I settled on was keeping track of things like player health. So if your health decreases, then the intensity increases because there's more things at stake. And if you can complete more levels and defeat more enemies, you're getting closer to your high score. So then intensity increases in that sort of way. And then once a sort of system was sort of drafted and structured, of course, we began composing. And again, there are different ways to do this, but the way I did it was I separated musical ideas into shorter, more loopable parts that would be easily layered onto each other and easily faded in and out according to intensity. I had these sort of like intensity layers that would go in and out of each other, fade in and out, cross-fading between different states and layers depending on what was happening. And I won't go too much into the music theory, but just to show off like what I made. Here's a transcription of the music in the different layers. So what you'll see in the example later on is that it starts off with this one layer with an oud, a bass guitar, and a timpani. And then as we increase the intensity, we add another layer of music over here with a cello and a synth. And then as things get more and more intense, we increase the complexity a fair bit by adding some like palm muted rhythm guitar and some some drums rather. And then as we get more and more intense, we add a sort of like high like piccolo sounding like synth part, which is sort of supposed to mimic like an alarm because things are getting more intense. And then we also change the drums a little bit. So here's the example of how it works in the context of the game itself while you're playing. So here you'll notice it's just the first layer of music being played, nothing else. But as you go on, the music will evolve and change according to what's happening. Right here, we've reached a certain threshold, so we add layers to the music. And one thing I also forgot to mention was that there are also like rest areas to sort of like take a break. And so when you reach these rest areas, the music will also change to reflect that sort of like, okay, we're taking a break, take a breath of fresh air. And then here we add the drums because the tension is building up once again. And then I'll just skip ahead a little bit to get to the last part where we enter the final layer of music. So over here, you heard that sort of like rising flourish and cymbal crash, along with the heavier drums and some other synth coming in, to sort of reflect the fact that like, okay, you've made some good progress. Don't lose your streak now type of feeling. And again, that happens all automatically in the engine. It's not like the player or whatever pressing a specific button to change it. It's just happening as you play the game behind the scenes automatically. And lastly, I just want to go over a couple of small post-mortem things that I learned while making this project. First thing I realized was that the dialogue needed a lot more organization than I initially thought of at first. There's a lot of metadata to track, whether that be when to play it, the order in which to play the dialogue and stuff like that. And while I was doing this, I sort of realized that the recording itself was fairly easy. You know, getting in front of a mic and saying words in front of a script was the first step to a process. And then the implementation was the rest of the process that included bug fixing, tracking metadata, stuff like that. Another thing I realized was that the audio really required a very solid foundation to start. The audio is a supplementary part to the gameplay. And so I spent a lot more time than I initially expected just planning out the systems before actually composing. And sort of similar to the dialogue, the composing of the music wasn't as hard as the spending time to make sure that I was making something that would make sense and sound good in specific contexts. And then lastly, I sort of realized that doing everything at once was very, very exhausting. I'm not much of an artist myself, so I had to sacrifice some of the art for the audio. I just sort of got free assets that I found online or on the Unity store. And I also think that I relied a bit too much on my previous knowledge. And by that, I mean, there were other solutions to problems that I could have gone and that probably would have helped later on. But, you know, it's part of the learning experience, and it's something that I will take on like further projects and like will keep in mind, you know, to keep an open mind for stuff like that. And that's the end of my presentation. Opening up to Q&A.
Thanks, Will. Wow, that sounds immensely complicated. And you got to synchronize a whole bunch of stuff at the same time. And all this has to be. So are you a programmer? I mean, you must be, right? I mean, you programmed all this.
Yeah. I started off in game design, and then I also had a background in music. So then I decided, you know, I kind of want to combine the two. And this is sort of the thing I arrived at.
Is this the first time you've attempted and succeeded in doing something like this?
I've worked on other games with music with sort of like changing states, but none that change as much as this. You know, with having to keep track of like player health and going through like different dungeon levels and intensity and stuff like that. So the complexity of this project was definitely like a first for me.
Yeah, I can appreciate that. So much variability, but I mean, there's only so many things. I mean, it's not an infinite number of things that a player can do, right? I mean, there are a set number, but it's a large number because there are different variables, and so interacting, they produce different requirements of the program. Wow, I was very impressed with that, I must say.
Thank you.
Are you gonna? So you mentioned that you might be continuing along these lines. So is this something that you're going to build on?
I don't think I'll build on this project specifically. Mainly just because a lot of the systems I made, I realized were flawed. And but when I realized that, I was very far in the game and I just couldn't like turn back. But you know, along with the postmortem and stuff like that, there are definitely things that I realized that I could have worked upon and things that I could have improved, that in future projects that I'm already like thinking about sort of, I can sort of take what I've learned from this and then improve upon it in future things and stuff like that.
Have you thought about how you're going to present this? I mean, you have a poster at the symposium. Are you going to have Are people going to be able to play this, or how are you going to develop the audience opportunities to engage with this?
Yeah. I definitely want people to play it and to also hear it. I might do a bit more work on it just to make sure that it is all polished, no bugs and stuff like that. But I definitely want people to play it. Bring my laptop or something to interact with it, stuff like that. Some speakers for them to listen to.
Great. Really enjoyed that. Meg?
Yeah, thanks, Stephen. So Will, that's fascinating. And I think Stephen's use of the word synchronizing is probably perfect, because there are so many different aspects that you are coordinating all at the same time. So, my question is, what is your background in music? And you mentioned composing. So the music, the actual sheet music that you showed us that you were overlaying, is that open source, or is that something that you composed?
Oh, that's something that I composed myself. Of course, I took inspiration from other games, stuff like that. But like, the actual like instruments and stuff like that, or rather not the instruments, but the arrangement and the composition itself was made by me.
Okay. And what is your background in music?
I played piano a lot when I was a kid. Also taught myself guitar and stuff like that. And while I was here at RIT, I also took some music and composing classes, found out that I really liked those. And then I started composing for games and stuff like that. And eventually it evolved into doing stuff like this, where it's implementing music into games and seeing how far I can push that sort of like music working with the gameplay sort of aspect of things.
That's great. I really appreciate how many different aspects of your learning at RIT you've pulled into this project. Out of curiosity, so when I think about, a game, or I think about action in a game, there's always this music in the background that you either are or aren't necessarily aware of. Have you done any audience testing to see to what extent they are noting the changes in the music, or if they're feeling it? I'm assuming you want it to be just this comprehensive experience. So I'm curious if you've gotten any feedback about what that's been like.
Yeah, I've had a couple of people play test, mainly just like friends and stuff like that. The way I would explain it is that the music, again, is supplementary. So I want people to notice it, but I also want people to play the game as well. And so what I've been noticing, them saying is that they can definitely hear the music and like hear it intensify. But it's more of like a sort of like background, sort of like it's happening. It's like sort of like an ambient type of thing.
Mhm.
But with that being said, even though it's more of like a background ambient sort of thing, if you remove this audio completely, it just doesn't feel as intense or as like immersive as before, because there's this whole layer of like, oh, okay, now I'm just walking around hitting things. There's nothing really much, there's not much feedback. And so the audio, I feel, even if it's just like a background thing, is still like an important layer to show the player like what's happening, and also just fun to listen to.
Right. Well, it's
I
enrichment, right? So it's part of the whole experience, like you said. Yeah, that's really interesting. I enjoyed that. Thank you.
Thank you.
Any other questions for Will? No. Okay, then thanks, Will, and we're gonna move on to Chris.
Okay. Let's see. Okay, so see, my project was a water turret. Well, I guess in this presentation, I sort of want to explain the way I approached it, and I mostly have it divided between the remote and the actual turret itself. Okay, so I kind of took inspiration from like a sentry turret, basically. Like, but instead of like automatically targeting something, like I actually wanted to be able to control it. Like, I guess one reason I wanted to do this was I wanted to be able to like shoot my brother or my little sister or something. I thought that'd be fun, but let's see. So right now, I have a few topics over here that are relevant to the turret. So microcontrollers and programming. Well, microcontrollers basically, you can describe them as like little computers. Like they have inputs and outputs, which are like your keyboard and your mouse. Those would be inputs, and your output would be like your monitor. So basically what you're seeing on the screen, like when you move the mouse, that's your input. And when you see the cursor move, that would be your output. And then obviously wireless communication. And that's something I haven't worked with before, so I thought that would be interesting. And servo motors. Now, these are a little different from other motors that just spin around. Like these, you can precisely change the angle where it's facing with a pulse width modulation, which is sort of, you give a certain frequency and you power, like you give power on that frequency for a certain duration, and it averages out to a certain power level, and that dictates where the servo kind of turns. Obviously electronic circuits and a water shooting implement. And I have reading spec sheets on here because well, basically that's how you figure out which parts to choose. Okay, so for the controller, I basically thought that I would use a joystick to aim the turret, and I would use a push button to shoot out. And then I would use a radio transceiver to send the signals. So right now I kind of have this organized in a way that you could understand that there are 3 inputs. The microcontroller, which reads the inputs, it does some manipulations so that the radio transceiver can actually read it and then output. So oh, hold on a second. So I have the Arduino Nano that I chose as my microcontroller, and that supports pulse width modulation for the servo motors. It's relatively small, so I can fit that on a breadboard. Let me see, there's a lot of support for it, so if I had any questions or something, I could look it up online, and there's a lot of documentation for it, so that's also another reason I chose it. And then the NRF24, I noticed that it's used often with wireless communication with Arduino now, so I thought that would be a good idea to use that. So from this slide, I sort of used the colors to like of the inputs, the microcontroller and the outputs above the text of the code over here, like the inputs become analog value 1, analog value 0, pin 2. Those are read and become stick X value, stick Y value, push button 1. And the output is called radio. It uses pins 9 and 10. But now in black, I pointed out that we're using the Arduino IDE. And that's important because there are certain libraries that actually make the code simpler than I thought it would be. like if you look at the I guess that the picture on the bottom left over here, that would be sort of a schematic for the NRF 24. And basically there are like 5 outputs, but let's see, an output over here, it's only showing 2 pins. So basically this code really simplifies it a lot so that I don't have to write to a lot of registers. I don't have to concern myself with the SCK, which is the system clock, MISO, which is the, let's see, master input and slave output, or the MOSI, which is the master output and slave input. And the MISO and MOSI are used to facilitate communication between the microcontroller and the transmitter here. So data is actually only sent by this CE pin, and it's in yellow over here. But it's only those 2 pins really, and the clock basically keeps time. Okay, so over here in yellow, I have data manipulation, which is going on within the microcontroller. And basically, you have a setup, usually, which is one main part of the code, and a loop. The setup is usually something that only happens once. It's like you initialize it, and that's it. And you have a, let's see, serial begin here, which is start the serial monitor, and that's basically how you would usually debug. And then this code radio begin is just to initialize the radio open writing pipe. But let's see, this radio pipe variable is the sort of frequency you're using, and both the receiver and the transmitter have to have the same frequencies that they're communicating over. And then this radio set auto acknowledges false, so it's not really used. Then this set data rate is just how quickly we want to communicate. And radio set PA level is just how much power, how far we want the signal to go, and how much power we want to use. Let's see, these 3 variables here, input data, channel 1, channel 2, and channel 3. I'm just initializing these to some sort of base values so they don't float to whatever they want to. Now it's void loop. Okay, it's showing that we're reading these variables from the inputs, and then because we can't actually use the raw data, we have to convert it with this map function. So it turns 1024, like that's 10 bits, and we can only use 8 bits, into 250. 0 to 255 is the new range. And then obviously at the end, we're writing, so that's just looping forever. And this is sort of how the controller turned out. Well, there's a lot of wires, and all I really had to look up was just where to place the wires. But because of those certain libraries, like there's a lot of code that I didn't need to include, even though I looked up different registers and stuff to use, so made it easier. But I had a couple of challenges here, which I needed to add a base chip to keep the operation of the NRF24 steady, because usually powering it from the Arduino, like sometimes it doesn't have enough power from the 3 volts that it transmits. So I use this base chip to do that, but it took some time to figure that out. And also the push button, called a switch for some reason, but let's see.
Chris, you have 2 minutes.
All right. Well, let's get to design of the turrets. Want it to be aimable along a horizontal and a vertical axes. So on the right side, I have a platform. On top of that, there's the circuitry, the servo motor on the left, another platform, and then I wanted to make it a little tall. So I add this cylinder, another servo motor, and sort of how I wanted to attach a nozzle to that circular bit over there. And this is just sort of showing the flow of the data over here. It's basically the same, except coming from the transceiver and going to the water pump, which I ended up using like some sort of electric water gun. Like I tried to use a different thing, but it wasn't strong enough. Now again, the input is see, from the radio we have microcontroller variables, and the output to the servo 2. Now again, I mentioned the Arduino IDE over here in black because that simplified another part of my code, where all I had to know really was I guess the lower frequency and the higher frequencies that I would need to send to the servo, and then basically would do all the math, even though I figured out how to do all that and looked up all the registers and things to activate it. And again, there's this radio stuff here. Now in the loop, here I have some nested if statements. Well, I'm basically checking if I move the stick forward, and if I did, I wanted to check that I didn't reach the max angle, or if I moved it down, I wanted to make sure that I didn't go to the past the minimum angle. And then of course I'm checking if I push the button or not. And now here I needed an external power source for the water gun, because the 9-volt battery wouldn't cut it, and the power coming out of the Arduino wouldn't cut either, because there wouldn't be enough current. So
Chris, can you wrap it up now? You've gone over your 15 minutes.
Okay. So basically I came up with using a transistor as a switch. You basically use another power source. You put I guess okay, well, I think I want to get to this at the very least. I ended up miswiring that last circuit. I kind of just blew up my transistor, and I think I blew up the motor too, because smoke came out of it. But at the very least, I had this part working. So I can move it up, down, left, and right, and then I think I'm showing move diagonal afterwards. But anyways, I think I want to continue working on this project just to make sure that I can shoot my little sister and my brother with it. So.
Okay. Well, I'm going to bring your presentation to a halt now, and I have to say that, you know, just as I asked Will how he plans to do the symposium, I'm glad that you're not going to be shooting water at the audience in the symposium. So maybe.
But you definitely need to bring your prototype and set it up.
Right. So Chris, so tell me how much, so you visualized this project beforehand, right? I mean, had you done anything like this before?
Not really. I knew about servo motors. I knew about microcontrollers, but I haven't actually worked with wireless frequencies. I haven't actually put anything together that used any of these components before.
I see. And so, you know, oftentimes we ask, so where does this lead to? Are you going to continue? I mean, you said you want to make, you know, go back and make sure that it works. But beyond that, I mean, where is this going to take you, if anywhere in particular?
Well, I guess I want to, I guess maybe work on some more electronics or something, like maybe try to invent like some toys or something, maybe using microcontrollers and move these moving parts like motors and things. I mean, I don't really have anything specific in mind, but I think maybe that's some sort of direction that I want to go in.
I see. Okay, great. Thanks a lot, Meg.
So Chris, what a creative project. That was really fun to have you walk us through, you know, all the different components. Certainly a lot of trial and error, I would imagine.
Yes.
That's where, you know, we know that's where all the learning happens. So what would you say is the biggest takeaway for you in terms of learning, either about yourself or about something specific, something novel that you've learned, something new that you've learned in this process?
I guess, let's see, one thing would be to actually really make sure I know where I've put things in the circuit before I turn it on, because it just messed myself up here. But I mean, what I was able to really, let's see, I guess increase my ability to like look through these spec sheets, because some of these are like 400, 500 pages long, and really you have to really search to find this information out. And
so I would jump in and ask, was this confidence building for you that you could do this? And it appears as though it's, you know,
a little bit like
one of your siblings.
Sorry, I didn't get that last bit.
I was going to say, is this confidence building for you that you could do this, and it appears as though it may actually work?
Yes, I actually thought it was going to be more difficult, honestly, like, because I just never attempted to do this. But as I started working on it, and the more I worked on it, I thought like, wow, this is really viable.
Well, you've got some great pictures of the process, which would be really great to share on your poster. And I think be ready to talk about at the symposium, probably the biggest hurdles for you, and maybe where the best learning took place. But I really enjoyed it. Looks like a, you know, a great sibling rivalry device. So nice job. Any other questions from anybody?
Not necessarily a question, but a suggestion. If you looked at a way of scaling this up, you know, and incorporating, you know, a remote functionality drive system, it'd be something that would be applicable for fire suppression, marketable to, fire departments, especially if you put it like on a small set of tank tracks or something like that with a continuous water supply. Be great for fighting fires within a confined space where you don't want to put a live firefighter into. You could also learn about like Roomba technology and heat sensing, and maybe incorporate it into like a Roomba type home device for fighting a fire within a house, before the fire department even got there. There's a lot of different avenues you could take this.
I think that's a really great suggestion, actually. Like, I hadn't thought of that kind of thing. So,
well, I was going to say, it definitely would be, if you got it shielded and you got it working to where you could put enough fire retardant on a target, and especially if you could figure out how to do it autonomously where you didn't actually need a controller, that you write the software to do it, I think that you would find a huge market for a device like that.
Great idea.
Idea, for sure.
And thanks, Chris. So now we are going to switch to you, Tom. So take it away.
Yes, sir. Here we go. There we go. Are you all seeing my slide presentation?
Not yet.
Not yet.
I can see you, but not your slide presentation.
That's because I need to hit the share button.
Oh, there you go.
How's that?
Yep, that's good.
Okay, so good morning. My name's Tom Holman, and obviously I'm a senior here in the SOIS program at RIT. I'm also a retired paramedic from Austin, Texas. And so for my project, I chose to create a framework for a postgraduate level fellowship program for physician's assistants wanting to specialize in pre-hospital medicine and EMS. I actually started in EMS right here at RIT back in 1993, working with the RIT ambulance. And over the course of my career, I've noticed a problem. A fair number of patients utilize 911 services to gain access to basic medical care. And oftentimes their issues kind of fell into that gray area that was beyond the scope of practice as a paramedic, but where at least I felt that an expensive ambulance trip to an emergency room was just overkill. Specific examples of this were patients that, they just needed stitches on an uncomplicated cut, or they needed a prescription refill to tide them over until they could get an appointment to get into a clinic or to see their primary care doc. So the solution that I see to this problem in filling that gap is the utilization of PAs and nurse practitioners as what we call mid-level providers within the pre-hospital setting. And I see them working in conjunction with the local EMS system to efficiently and cost effectively meet the needs of all of the members of the community. This project has combined my passion for providing medical care to my community with my enjoyment of teaching and my hope for a second post-retirement career as a PA. So I foresee PAs fulfilling three main roles within EMS. First, as medical providers, PAs would be responsible for caring for the sick and injured members of the community they serve. They would primarily focus on the two ends of the sick patient spectrum, helping to care for those not necessarily needing those full resources of the ER, but they would also be a great asset in helping paramedics deal with the high end of that sick patient spectrum, dealing with patients that may fall above that comfort level or even the scope of practice of the average paramedic. PAs could also fill roles within the QA, QI, which is quality assurance and quality improvement programs, and also the continuing education groups, which are supposed to be parts of every EMS service. And I'll expand more on that here in a minute. So suggested entry requirements into the program. Obviously, you'll need a state license as a PA. Depending upon what state it's implemented, the program's implemented in, and also the preference of the medical director, they may also require paramedic license or certification. They would require the ability to prescribe medications, which at least back home, most everybody referred to that as a DEA number. And for someone interested in specializing in EMS as a PA, I would highly recommend that they would have a background in EMS. There's just so many moving parts within EMS that having some kind of prior experience before going into this, I think would be really beneficial to them. So I foresee this program, this fellowship program, actually being a paid position within the EMS system. It would be a salaried position. It would have full-time benefits similar to every other full-time employee within the EMS system. And there would be actually some special benefits for the PA fellow. They would get enrollment into the educational institution that is the partner in this fellowship program. They would have their CE hours that are required to help maintain their PA license covered, and they would actually also get their malpractice insurance covered by the EMS system. These are all things that are typically, you know, if a PA is just working in a doctor's office, excuse me, these are things that they usually have to pay for out of pocket. So to have them covered is actually a pretty nice benefit. Just a quick mention about the proposed schedule for this program. It'd be a 12-month program running from the beginning of July to the end of June. And that's to make it coincide with the physician's fellowship schedule. I foresee a lot of the specialty classes that would be part of this program would actually be duplicates of those offered to physicians doing an EMS or an emergency medicine fellowship. And rather than having to duplicate efforts, if we run the programs concurrently, that would allow the PAs to sit in on those classes with the physicians and just be more efficient that way. This 8-week operational academy, I'll discuss more in depth here in just a minute. I chose to include ultrasound. Ultrasound is the only imaging technology in medicine that's readily adaptable to the EMS environment. And this 2-week rotation would basically just be a refresher for the PAs. They should have gotten exposure to it in PA school and probably have used it if they've worked as a PA prior to doing this fellowship. But the devices used or starting to be used in EMS are a little bit different than the ones that they have seen at the hospital or at the clinic. And so this rotation would be, you know, knock the cobwebs off and also teach them about those specific devices. So the PA fellow will be expected to complete precepted rideouts with a paramedic field training officer. And that's specifically because every EMS system is unique. It's got specific ways of doing stuff and specific challenges that the providers have learned to work with or work around. And so just by doing and observing, I think is the fastest way for the PA fellow to learn about those specifics. Once those ambulance rides are done, the PA would move to doing ride-alongs with either the medical director or their mentor in the fellowship, who would either be a physician or a PA that already works within the EMS system. And then once everybody is in agreement that the PA fellow is ready, they would actually be moved, over into a independent operational role, and they would actually work as a fully fledged PA in the EMS system, responding to calls and taking care of patients. They'd also be expected to assist in the QA/QI process. That would involve doing chart reviews, looking for errors or issues. They would also participate in investigations that resulted from medical mishaps or complaints that were generated in the course of doing business. I also think that this PA fellow would be in a kind of a unique and a great position to observe and provide feedback to the EMS paramedics, because they'll be running calls side by side with them, and they would be perfectly positioned to provide timely feedback, both positive and negative, for the paramedics. The PA fellow will also be expected to create and deliver 2 continuing education classes to the EMS system, and one of those 2 could actually be what we call an SOC, or a standard of care update, which would be a part of their QI duties that they were doing. And it would also fulfill the need to have some type of a research component within the fellowship program. And speaking of research, if the PA fellow chose not to do that SOC update and literature review as their research, they could actually also design, participate in, or collaborate on an ongoing research project or a study that's being conducted with the EMS system. The PA fellow will also be expected to maintain their licenses, and usually they do that by attending CE classes. In addition to those CE classes, there are several specific or EMS and emergency medicine specific classes that probably will be recommended by their mentor based on the individual background. Those recommendations, will be based on the individual background of the PA fellow. Someone like me coming in with many years of EMS experience probably won't be pushed into these classes quite as hard as somebody coming straight out of PA school with very minimal background. But the 2 that I see probably being mandatory for just about everybody would be the Advanced Trauma Life Support and TCCC, which is this Tactical Emergency Casualty Care course. Both of those teach specific skills and mental processes that aren't taught during PA school. They're very emergency specific and EMS specific. And so I foresee that those 2 definitely would be part of every fellowship program.
Tom, you have 1 minute.
Oh, good Lord. These CD classes here at the bottom are study related courses, which would be needed for anybody wanting to participate in that bio study. The Operational Academy, you would have a system overview. You would have to learn how to drive emergency vehicles because it's different than driving a civilian vehicle. the specialty responders, patients find themselves in very odd places, and EMS has evolved responders specifically for so many of those unique environments. And I could foresee a PA having to work with those responders to treat those patients. So having them have at least a basic level of training and familiarization with each of these environments should be a big part of it. A safety course, medical legal issues, there are inherent dangers and issues with working in an EMS environment. And I think having specific classes addressing each of those is very important. All of the tools that we use in EMS need to be oriented if they're not already familiar with them. And then success measures for determining if you've successfully completed the fellowship program. Obviously, you would need to complete all of your training phases. You'd have to have maintained all of the required licenses and certs. If there's any classes that issue grades that are put into place, they would need to be at least a C or better for success. You'd have to complete the research component, whether it's the SOC update or the study. You'd have to have gotten overall good reviews on your CE presentations that you did, and have had adequate participation in the QA/QI process. And then finally, to wrap it up, there would be a oral review board with your mentor, the medical director, and any other partners within the program. And this would be basically an oral examination of any and all of the aspects of the training that they've received during the fellowship. And successfully passing that oral board would wrap up their fellowship and prepare them for any of the specialization exams that would be given by the organization certifying the specialty, which would not be the EMS system. It would be a third party. So that concludes my prepared presentation. Are there any questions?
Thanks, Tom. Meg, do you have any time? I know Meg's got to go to another meeting.
Actually, I've shared a couple questions with Sydney, and I know she has a couple questions, so she's going to jump in. But Tom, thank you. That was really interesting, and I look forward to hearing more about it. And I'll catch up with Sydney and Stephen. The feasibility of this is going to be really interesting. I mean, it seems mutually beneficial, so I'm excited to learn more. But Sydney, I'll turn it over to you.
Great, thanks. Hi, Tom. It's nice to see you. So Tom and I have worked together now for I don't know how many years, but I don't know if I've ever seen him or actually met him. So it's nice to meet you, Tom.
I haven't forgotten. I still owe you beers.
Okay, I won't let you forget either. It's all right. So I guess, yes, Meg was texting me questions. I'll go through and try to just pick a couple of the highlighted ones. And then I have a question of my own. But are there any programs similar to this in the nation? Like anything you can benchmark against already happening similarly or no?
As far as an educational program, no.
Okay.
In fact, there are, as far as I know, there are 3 PAs working in the pre-hospital environment in the United States right now.
Wow.
I actually, no, I lied. Austin EMS just hired 2 more, so
Okay.
5 PAs.
Is this then like, is your vision that this is just like a stop for a PA on a career ladder, or could a PA make a career out of this pre-hospital environment?
I definitely see a PA or nurse practitioner, either one, being able to make this a career. There are definitely enough patients to make it economically feasible. And there's enough work for them to do. And I don't think it would be as physically demanding as being like an ambulance paramedic, to where you'd have to worry about their body wearing out over a course of 20 or 25 years.
So it's almost like at-home doctor's visits. I mean, really, because the PA is going to the person's home like an EMT would.
Right.
And I imagine they're not in the ambulance though with the EMT. They've got their own transportation, or are they sharing equipment with an ambulance? Like, and the ambulance is still dispatched, there's just a PA in there.
The way I foresee it working would be kind of like a house call from a doctor. The PAs would have their own response vehicles. For those lower acuity patients, it would just be the PA going to the house, having the visit with the patient, and dispositioning the patient, whether it's calling in a prescription, doing the stitches, what have you. And if it was a higher acuity level call, the PA would actually respond with an ambulance, and if needed, would actually jump in the back of the ambulance with the EMS providers that are assigned to the ambulance and assist with that patient care to the hospital.
So you really need to hook up with an economist who can run all, because I see this as like, there's the cost of the actual program with the salaries and the training and everything, but then it's so much bigger, right? Because now you've got to train probably 911 callers to sort of figure out the triage, right? Does an EMS go to this? Does a PA go to this? Because I imagine the incoming calls would be the same. Like you were saying, people call, which I didn't even know. I mean, this is sort of embarrassing, I guess, that, people call 911 for things like my prescription has run out, or I've cut myself and I don't have transportation on my own, maybe to the emergency room, right? I mean, those are the situations we're talking about. So really, it seems like now the next piece, and maybe you've already done this, but really is someone has to work these financial numbers and sell it to the insurance companies or someone to say, in the end, this will save money to someone that cares, right? Government, insurance companies, to say it's really because in my mind, things don't work unless they work financially, right?
Well, actually,
somehow it seems like it would save money because hospitals are expensive when people walk into a hospital, right?
That's actually already been done. Medicare is actually running a pilot program right now, offering EMS services, upgraded reimbursement for running physician response and PA response.
Wow.
And they have, my understanding, and I haven't seen the specific numbers on it yet, but my understanding is they've seen a significant cost savings by utilizing PAs in this role versus shipping everybody to the emergency room.
Yeah, I mean, I would imagine.
Yeah.
So what's the next step? Sorry, Stephen, I'm super interested in this topic. So I didn't know I would be, but my dad was in hospital administration. So I feel like I sort of have come up my whole life. I've heard about sort of the economics of hospitals and the medical system. So what's the next step for you? I mean, I know what you're doing. Do you have a desire to get into the administration portion of any of this?
Sorry about that. That was my son.
That's okay.
I don't know how to make that stop.
That's okay.
Anyway, hopefully, there we go. Okay. So the next step that I foresee for this program is finding an agency and an educational institution that are willing to collaborate on it. RIT would kind of be uniquely situated to host a program like this because they do have their own ambulance and they have a PA program.
Well, and we're affiliated with a hospital too, aren't we, Stephen? Is it Rochester?
Rochester General, yeah.
Yeah, Rochester General. We're affiliated with a hospital as well.
So the only The downside would be that the fact that the RIT ambulance is a BLS or a basic life support ambulance, that would require to upgrade them to the paramedic level. That would require, recertifying and training the folks that work on the ambulance to be ALS providers.
Okay.
Plus the medical direction here in New York is a little different than what I'm used to, because it's like at a multi-county level, with like Monroe Livingston County being one entity that that provides medical direction for all of the agencies.
Okay.
Whereas, where I came from in Texas, the individual agency has their own medical director, and that medical director determines what level of care they provide and everything. So that would be a challenge that I'm not familiar enough with the intricacies of it to try and implement it here in New York. But yeah, that would be the next step for a program like this, is, like I said, finding an EMS agency and an educational institution and getting them to sign off on it. It just actually so happens that my former coworker is working on creating the pre-hospital / EMS PA specialization,
Okay.
which is, it's like a credential. It's different. It's separate from the educational aspect of it, which is what I was working on for my project. He's actually working to try and get that credential created. So then this educational program would prepare someone to take the exam or fulfill the requirements to achieve that specialization.
Got it. Okay. Well, thank you. Stephen, I'll turn it over to you, but that was wonderful.
Tom, we're 10 minutes over, but I do have one question that Sydney touched on that I'm not seeing what the resolution is, and that is, so obviously you have your purpose, as you said at the beginning, was to reduce the number of unnecessary visits to the emergency room. So I get the front end of this, that you've got somebody trained, a PA with PA skills, so more than an EMS plus, I guess you could say, and you've got the person who is calling 911. Now, the person who's calling 911 doesn't know about this, right? I mean, they're in an emergency. Oh my God, what am I going to do? I'll call 911. So the intermediary to this, and where the triaging has to happen, is at the 911 center. So it seems to me that you got to include them in the system here in a big way, right?
And they are, and basically, I can only really speak to the system we had down in Austin. The EMS call takers, when a 911 call comes in down there, it goes to basically a civilian that listens to like the first 10 seconds of the complaint. That just, they're a civilian employee call taker, and they go, 911, what's the nature of your emergency? And if it's, oh, he's bleeding, they're like, okay, stand by for ambulance. And they transfer the call to an EMS call taker, who is an EMT or a paramedic that is specifically trained in triaging and dispatching EMS resources. If they say, oh my God, my house is on fire, it goes to the fire department's dispatch center. If they say, hey, there's a guy here with the gun, it goes over to the law enforcement dispatch center. And as far as integrating the PA response into that EMS response matrix, it is simply a matter of adding a couple of questions to the baseline interview or interrogation that those EMS call takers do. And,
I see. I didn't.
If this, and send just the PA. If this, send the PA plus the ambulance. If this, just send an ambulance.
So I've never called 911, so I didn't know that was what happened. So
Neither.
you say for a few seconds, the civilian who then reroutes the call, depending on the nature of the emergency, and then that's where the triaging happens. What would happen if you had these options? Okay, I got it. All right, I didn't know.
The other way I foresee a PA receiving a call would be like actually through an ambulance referral. So like something gets mistriaged, an ambulance goes, and it turns out that the guy just needs a prescription refill.
Yeah.
Okay. There'd be a voicemail system, or they could send the PA a text message and be like, hey, we're going to dispo this guy, but need you to come by and see him today. He's got 2 days left on his prescription and he needs this, and everything else is good. And a call like that could actually be just dispositioned by the PA with a phone call. You know, he could call the patient, do an oral interview. Hey, you're good. Nothing's changed. You know, you're not having any symptoms, nothing like that. Okay, I'll call your prescription and it'll be ready tomorrow for you to pick up at Walgreens.
Great. Oh, I get it now. Okay, I didn't know there was that second step. I thought it was all on the 911, the civilian. Okay, thanks very much. Great. It sounds like you got a great addition in store for the whole health system. That would really make a big change to the way we do things. So I hope you.
I think it would, and I definitely foresee it coming that way. There's too many people utilizing 911 as their primary healthcare for us to not evolve that direction. So.
Have you talked to people at RIT about this? Since you said, as you say, you know, this would be an ideal place for the training program.
I actually have not. I'm so disconnected from the ambulance here. I mean, obviously, everybody that I knew that was affiliated with it is long moved on and done other things. And there are just so many of the components that would be required to make this work. I'm not familiar with how the mechanics of them here. You know, specifically the medical direction aspect of it, because this would be a program that would rely heavily on the medical director. So I'm not sure that New York's system of medical direction would make it feasible.
Well, we do have to wrap up, but I encourage you to look into how you could engage RIT's interest. I don't know whether you'd have any success, but it seems like since we're all at RIT, it would be worth a shot. All right, everybody, thanks very much. 3 great presentations, and we look forward to seeing you again at the symposium. And Chris, go easy on your little sister. Take it easy, everybody. Bye-bye. Thanks, Sydney.
Bye. You're welcome. Bye.
Bye. Thank you.